I use my kneaded eraser to erase the pencil marks that I drew on there for the outlines. And now I am going to just do like one layer, well, kind of like two layers on this area right here of hatching, just to fill the space in. And this part to the right is very light because the shadow is going this way. So I'm not going to shade too much on that side. So I'm not going crazy right now. I'm just doing a very light layer right here and slowly transitioning to a highlight. Just like that. This is why I love what I do in portrait drawing with ballpoint pen, because as you can see, everything are shapes. Like every shadow, every highlight are just shapes. So for this part of the forehead, when I'm done with it, it's gonna look really cohesive and it's just gonna look like, I guess, a realistic portrait. But this is the breakdown of how I create these shadows, how I get to that cohesive state in my drawing. I tell people all the time, all I'm doing is layering. That's all I do with hatching. Like I just layer the lines on top of one another and I make sure I cross hatch very, very lightly. And I can't say that enough. Like your pressure control is super important. But you know, it takes time to layer and it's worth it. And if you have the patience, cool. If you don't, try to develop it. But for me, it's just second nature because it became muscle memory at this point. So I'm just building up the shadows. Cross-hatching lightly or hatching lightly helps with transitions as well from like a dark area to like a highlighted area. So it's worth the wait. Just take your time. Don't try to rush. Trust in the process. Trust in yourself. Right here, this shadow continues across the forehead, and this is how I just lay in my initial lines. As you can see, I'm not hatching too dark, just paying attention to how much pressure I apply. You can always build on top of it later, so it's better to go light at first than just to get really dark with the pen, with the ink on the paper, and then you can't really reverse that. So take your time. For when I lay down pen anytime, I use my kneaded eraser. I talked about this before, but I lightly erase away the pencil marks, just enough so I can faintly see them. And then I'll take my pen and do a very light line. Right now I'm drawing the hairline of this person's head, so I don't need to go dark just yet. I'm gonna wait to do that later just to make sure all my proportions are right and where I need to add in the darker value. So as you can see, it's not, super dark. I see a lot of beginner drawers or just artists in general who just make the line like super dark like that, and they just don't care about adding the value over time or gradually adding the value over time. There's been many times where I just initially drew very dark and I couldn't erase it. Like I was like 90% done with the drawing. And when I actually looked back at it from a distance, I realized, oh, this part needs to be a lot lighter, but I can't do anything about it. It's ballpoint pen. It's hard to erase ballpoint pen lines when they're that dark. Another thing I like to show is transition. So this part of where the eyebrow is, like, the skull bone, I don't really know the name of it, which I should. This is highlighted on this side, and then the rest around it is just shadow. So when it comes to transitions, like how I start anything when I draw a ballpoint pen, very light layer across. And as you can see, I'm not touching this part where the highlight is with my pen. I'm just coming like right up to it. Over time, you will see the shadow start to build up. I'm almost done with this part right now. Not done completely because I will come back and go over it once I have like all the marks on the paper. But right now I am about done and I'm leaving that part highlighted. My goal is to get all my pen marks down, whether if it's the correct value scale or not for the portrait. I don't care. I just want all my marks down just to give me a starting base to actually build up the shadows and values. This part is highlighted, so I'm gonna erase the pencil marks around it. And I'm not gonna make this too dark because since it is a highlight, I just need basically like 2 to 3 layers of hatching. So that's 1, this is 2, and this is 3. And that's pretty much all I need for now because again, I cannot make this too dark because there's no going back. Same with this area, just 1 or 2 layers. And now it's time to move on to the next thing. Now I'm gonna work on a eyelid just for a little bit. I'm not gonna do too much to it. So you can see the pencil marks using my kneaded eraser to get rid of that. And if you see like different shapes that are not initially on the paper, you can always take your mechanical pencil and draw in the highlight like I'm doing now. Because this is where the highlight is. There's a shadow right here. It's not super dark. And then there's this highlight around here in a circle. And this part is highlighted. So then I'm gonna take my kneaded eraser, lightly get rid of those pencil marks to where I can still see it. You probably can't see it, but I can. And then I lightly crosshatch, just like that. And the shadow on the eyelid is very light too, so I try not to make it too dark initially. And I can make this side a little dark. And that's all I'm gonna do to it for now. Moving on to the upper lip. And how I draw, I don't usually just do one section like the nose and finish that and then go to the next one. I just jump everywhere. And that's just my personal preference and that's how I draw. But do what works best for you. So now I'm working on the upper lip. Now this is the outline, and in this part right here, there's a shadow and this is the highlight. So you already know the drill, you know, erasing the pencil marks and lightly cross hatching into that shape. And since this part's a highlight, I can darken right at the edge of this line just to make that highlight pop. And you know, as you can see, I'm not going too dark. Just want to get, you know, a decent value of this line just to help contrast with the highlight. And then I'm gonna darken these. I'm gonna darken this line right here. like that. And this part right here is dark as well. So I'm gonna go in with my hatching and make sure this is where, there's that dip with the upper lip. And since there's a dip, the dip is usually darker than the rest, and the peaks are usually highlighted. Again, take your time with drawing, especially with ballpoint pen. There's no need to be in a rush. Now I'm moving on to just getting in this part of the eyelid. So I use natural light when I draw, and right now it's a little bit dim because I think it's gonna rain. So hopefully you'll be able to see this, and if not, I'll just bump up the exposure. So right here, I'm just filling in this shape that I imagined because I didn't, outline this shape. And then it slowly transitions to the darker value closer to the nose. And I'm gonna come back and rework this as well. Now I wanna show you how I draw hair. As you can see, I got the beard in. I still have to add some shadows to it and darken the value a little bit. But for this, the beard fades up. The technique I use is pretty much like a scribbling technique, and it's basically just like that. And it's just lines on top of one another, and kind of like a circular motion, but it doesn't have to be like a complete circle. It just has to form some type of curve, just like that. So that's what I do for this, for my hairs, for curly hair, especially like beards. As you can see, I don't apply as much pressure on the paper at first, just so I don't make it too dark. When beginners draw hair, and not all beginners, but from what I've seen, they like to put in every single shape that the hair makes from the reference photo. And I'm gonna tell you now, that does not matter. No one's gonna look at the reference photo and then your drawing and say, oh, this hair was actually right here. It really doesn't matter. Hair is just something that if you get the overall shape and proportion of the structure of the hair or the beard, then you're straight. Just make sure that it looks right. Hair does require layers as well. Just like when you're doing the skin, you're gonna have to go over it again. Sometimes hair can take longer than other features on the face just because it requires way more layering since it's like the darkest of darks in the portrait. But right now, I am just creating that beard shape that runs all the way up to near the ear. Just like that. And the reason why I left this whole side white is because this main part is like a bright highlight, and this is not as much highlight, but it's still lighter than the rest of the portrait. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna darken what I can over here, and then I'm gonna slowly crosshatch into those areas. It's good just to have those big shapes at first. I'm about to work on this eyebrow, but I'm not gonna do too much to it because I pretty much have most of it in. I just need to add more hairs right here. And this is the technique I use for my eyebrows. I'll always create this type of curve, and I'll start very lightly and then build on top of that. And you see, you can form that shape into an eyebrow that looks actually like an eyebrow. Right here, I'm gonna take my time and slowly put in those hairs. And this is all I'm gonna do for now. Leave it like that, and if I feel like I need to add more later on in the drawing, I will. So I haven't really drawn waves before. I've drawn many people with short hair, but not really just waves from what I remember. So how I'm gonna approach this is outline those different dips in the hair, because if you know anything about waves, that it literally resembles a wave. That's how the hairstyle is. It goes up and down, like there's a dip and then there's a curve on top. So since this hair is super dark and you can't really see too much of the waves, I'm just outlining some of the highlights to bring out when I do darken this hair. So just basic shapes, like this, maybe like a highlight right here. And when I draw hair, I pretty much always go in the direction the hair is flowing. So I'll be drawing it like that with individual pieces and then build on top of that. Maybe there's like a really light highlight right here. And then maybe something like right here. And then for the dark area that I did not outline, I'm gonna just fill that in with some hatching like that. Now that I have the basic shapes in, super basic shapes in, I'm gonna switch pens. So I pretty much use 2 pens for my portrait drawings. So this pen was for the light areas like the skin and some highlights or whatnot. And then this pen is gonna be for dark areas like the hair. And you're probably wondering what's the difference. Well, as you can see, this pen is fairly new. This one is an old pen, so the tip of it is going to be worn and it does smudge a lot more. So I will be using this for the dark area of the hair. So I'm starting off with that curved shape, and this shape is how waves are formed. I see a lot of artists making mistakes when it comes to outlining, especially like hair. They just want to create like a bold line outside, the hair, around the hair. For me, I just like to not make that line so prominent and just create the little hair pieces against the line just to give it a little bit of realism. It's just a small detail. It's optional. It's really whatever you decide, as long as it comes out right, I added these lines of hair, and what I'm doing now, the hairline up in the front is kind of like highlighted. So I am just, outlining these, the shapes I made with just these hairs. And then you see that highlight, I'm gonna go under that highlight and create another line. And waves usually aren't just like straight across. There's usually some that, connect with other waves and it forms another line. So I'm not gonna make the waves look, super perfect, just enough for you to be able to tell that it's, waves. As you can see, I gotten a lot done. I wish I was able to record it, but I was working late at night and I didn't really have that much light to actually record anything to make any content. But I think the last thing I left off on was the hair, and all I did was just I kept adding layers of cross hatching. I just made sure these shapes were in, and with that technique I showed you at first. And then I just built upon there, just kept layering and layering and layering. And then I added these little dots using the stippling technique. And then that's pretty much it. Before I had the underdrawing, and now I've added more values to the face, to the shadows. And I do have to add in a lot more darks and make sure some of the negative areas are filled in more. But besides that, like, I just been waiting to do the eyes. In a portrait drawing, the eyes are the most important part to me because that's what really makes or break the portrait. If you can't get the eyes right, then it really won't look like the person you're drawing. And like I said before, I kept this side highlighted because this is really highlighted and I didn't want to make it too dark. So I wanted to keep that contrast.